Welcome to our video, 10 Vital Supply Chain Lessons from the Coronavirus Pandemic, presented to you by SupplyChainGameChanger.com. The coronavirus has upended every aspect of our lives. It's disrupted our health, our freedom of movement, employment, the economy, our ability to buy or sell goods, virtually every supply chain around the world. Early on, we started to hear about shortages of toilet paper, hand sanitizer, various food and household goods. Then we started to hear about shortages of healthcare, personal protective equipment like masks and gowns and ventilators. Those shortages are just tip of the iceberg indicators of the fragility of the global supply chain, no matter what industry or business you are in. In this video, we'd like to talk about what the lessons are we need to have learned from the coronavirus pandemic that we cannot forget as the pandemic comes under greater control. So let's talk about some of the disruptions. Early on in the pandemic, China locked down hundreds of millions of people. They closed down manufacturing facilities and logistics operations, which had immediate economic repercussions for the rest of the world. Shortly thereafter, the tsunami of infections overtook Europe and the Middle East, and then spread to North America and beyond. And even in the middle of 2020, the U.S. is still seeing dramatically accelerated levels of the coronavirus. Borders have been closed, air travel curtailed, tourism has plummeted, restaurants closed, entertainment and sporting events stopped. The list of disruption just goes on and on. So it's incumbent for us to make sure that we understand, with the level of fragility that's been exposed in the supply chain by the coronavirus pandemic, what are the lessons we can learn? So let's start with number one, the importance of supply chain talent. For far too long, supply chain has been considered a back office transactional function, placing purchase orders or moving and receiving goods. The reality is that supply chain is the engine which not only determines the level of success or effective operation of a company, but it directly informs and shapes the strategic direction, growth, and competitive positioning and the survival of any company. The current coronavirus pandemic has underscored the importance of supply chain. Further, it's made apparent the critical need for supply chain leadership at all levels to get through this situation. Lesson 2, designing in supply chain flexibility. Whether initiated by product design teams, marketing professionals, or supply chain staff, the design of products and the resultant supply chain defines the level of flexibility that exists to deal with unforeseen circumstances. A natural starting point is the level of single or sole sourcing that is put in place. A sole source is a supplier selected because they are uniquely able to provide the materials and components, whether by virtue of intellectual property or other means of going to market with exclusivity. A single source is a supplier selected as the only supplier on the basis of varying decision criteria, even though there are other suppliers who are able to provide those materials. Whenever a disaster or phenomena such as the coronavirus occurs, continuity of supply is disrupted. The predominant reason is disruption due to sole source or single source decisions. While sole sourcing can provide competitive advantage, and while single sourcing can provide enhanced terms, when supply is disrupted, all of these advantages disappear. Any and all opportunities to source with multiple parties should be considered and designed into your supply chain structure. Bills and materials should be scrutinized for opportunities to identify substitutes, relax specifications, inform fit or function, and use more commoditized and less unique materials. This redundancy provides greater contingency and options that can be exercised relatively quickly when a crisis of any kind occurs. Lesson 3, taking total cost of ownership seriously. Total cost of ownership is a procurement sourcing methodology which entails taking into account all aspects of doing business with a supplier, not just unit costs. TCO models can include variables such as unit price, AP terms, cost of quality, lead times, technological value, logistics, management costs, and more. The idea of TCO modeling is to better inform sourcing decisions, taking into account all the real costs of doing business with a particular suppliers, not just unit cost. However, far too many organizations either pay lip service to TCO or don't use them at all. One result is the fact that companies can end up sourcing products in distant, low-cost regions of the world. It is not by accident that China has become the highest manufacturing output country in the world. But having all your eggs in one basket exposes tremendous vulnerabilities when there's a problem. When China locked down hundreds of millions of people in February 2020, innumerable manufacturing facilities were closed and supply chains of every type were shut down virtually immediately. This does not mean that all manufacturing should be done domestically in the country of consumption, but it does mean that supply chain design should not allow for sourcing exclusively based on lowest price. Sourcing in alternate locations will help reduce risk by virtue of creating redundancy and natural contingencies. Lesson 4: Mission Critical and Strategic Inventory Positioning. Inventory can often be one of the biggest assets in many companies, spanning multiple channels and tiers and being the biggest determinant of cash flow and return on investment. As such, we have decades of philosophy associated with lean inventory management, just-in-time delivery, and inventory minimization. While these paradigms will continue to be important, once we get past this pandemic, it's time to consider inventory positioning. The panic buying that's occurred with toilet paper, hand sanitizer, and basic household supplies is a matter to be considered. Alternative demand-supply planning models and advanced digital analytics are potential options, but with the rapidity of the change in demand and hence supply, they've been historic and unprecedented. Even more significant is the crisis associated with the lack of sufficient healthcare supplies, such as ventilators and medical masks. Without these items, we cannot treat those who are infected and in need of attention. We hear a lot about strategic reserves and stockpiles of oil, for instance. It's now time to consider similar strategic stockpiles for items, these healthcare items, and manage them in a much better way than has been done previously. Lesson 5: Disaster planning taken seriously. Far too many companies don't have disaster recovery plans. Or if they do, those plans are covered in layers of dust sitting in a cabinet somewhere. The coronavirus pandemic has had global impact for sure, but there's always something happening somewhere in the world. Natural disasters, man-made disasters may be unpredictable. However, the expectation that a disaster of some kind will occur is very predictable. Worst-case scenario planning, audits, rehearsals, drills must be taken seriously. This should inform further improvements for these plans to assure they are complete and robust. Lesson 6: Exhaustive end-to-end supply chain mapping. It's insufficient to assume that supply chain sourcing is done only looking at Tier 1 or direct suppliers. In most cases, your Tier 1 suppliers are reliant on their own Tier 2 suppliers, and in turn they're reliant on Tier 3 suppliers, and so on. A disruption at any tier can bring your entire supply chain to a halt. You must understand all tiers of your supply chain. Supply line incongruities anywhere in your chain will disrupt your operation. You need to understand these so that you can put alternate and previously considered plans into action when required and quickly. Supply chain mapping must include your transportation service as well. Whether you ship by land, air, or sea, you must know who your carriers are at every step, and you must know what your alternatives are if you need to enact them on a moment's notice. Remember that everyone else will be scrambling to find carriers at the same time. Previous planning can reduce a lot of anxiety. Lesson 7: Design your supply chain for speed of response. Anyone who's worked in supply chain for any amount of time knows that there is always pressure to do things with speed. Never is this requirement for speed more important than when you're dealing with a crisis or a catastrophe. The ability to quickly change sources, substitute parts, move inventory between channels, repurpose manufacturing facilities, move tooling, or change transportation modes are indicators of how rapidly your supply chain can adapt to any scenario. Previously, I've discussed the concept of the lead time agnostic supply chain. If your supply chain is truly designed for speed of response, then lead time should become less relevant as you are able to respond to fluctuations in demand, supply, or other circumstances with lightning speed. Lesson 8. Don't overlook the role of reverse logistics. Reverse logistics is a pivotal lever to fight any crisis. Recycling, reclamation, and refurbishment are more than just good things to do for the environment and to promote proper sustainability stewardship. When your supply lines are disrupted, the ability to reclaim and refurbish products and component materials can serve as ways to restore some level of supply continuity. Any materials that you can yield through these activities will certainly augment your supply levels and help you buy time until the rest of your supply chain restoration kicks in. Lesson 9. Real-time risk management governance. Supply chain professionals must get ahead of any crisis quickly. Failure to act quickly and decisively can result in extended catastrophic results. Government delays in seriously dealing with the coronavirus pandemic are a case in point. Supply chain leaders must immediately create war rooms with dedicated cross-functional representation. Worst-case scenarios and real-time decision-making must be undertaken with all possible information provided in real time. It is often better to do something than to do nothing. If a quick decision is found to be incorrect, then you can quickly change that decision and course correct. But that can only be done if you have a real-time war room management mentality. And lesson 10. You must invest in digital supply chain technologies. The digital supply chain is characterized by real-time end-to-end electronic connectivity across your entire extended supply chain. With this electronic connectivity, you will have all the information at your fingertips about what is going on anywhere in your supply chain in real time. Information is power, and this real-time information gives you all the power you need to make instantaneous decisions to deal with any scenario. Any combination of technologies such as blockchain, the Internet of Things, advanced analytics, big data, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, and more provide the platform for creating a digital supply chain. It's not necessary to implement all of these technologies at once, but with a long-term digital supply chain strategy in place, this end-to-end electronic connectivity will be enabled over time, and it is this connectivity which will put you in the best possible position to deal with any crisis or any eventuality. The last of our supply chain lessons is perhaps the most important for the future. So, in conclusion, as we consider all of these lessons and as we move through the pandemic, make sure you remember that even though things will become better, you cannot forget the lessons that we have learned through the coronavirus pandemic. There will be another pandemic in the future. There will be another disaster of some kind. If you apply these lessons, then your supply chain will be much more resilient and robust and able to deal with the next crisis, the next disaster before it happens. Thank you very much for your time, and please be sure to join us on supplychaingamechanger.com. Thank you.